The next major update for Space Engineers 2 is officially out. Vertical Slice 2, known as Planets and Survival Foundations, adds a significant new feature set to the game, including the planets Verdure and Chemic, along with a basic survival and crafting loop. Keen Software House graciously allowed me approximately 2 weeks of early access gameplay with VS2, and in this video, I'm going to go over my honest thoughts about the update now that it's available to everyone. But before we get started, if you enjoy the content that I create on this channel, then be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and make sure notifications are turned on so that you don't miss any of my Space Engineers content. You'll find links in the description for my Discord, Patreon, merch, and more. Now, let's get to the good stuff. Vertical Slice 2 has been anxiously awaited by Space Engineers fans since it was announced earlier this year. We've seen countless dev diaries, previews, screenshots, and heard multiple testimonials from Keen Software employees on the vision for the update and the experience of living and building on the game's new planets. But how does it measure up in the real world? It's critical to remember that this game is still in very early access alpha state. Anyone playing the game at this point must understand that you're dealing with something that is light years away from being a final product. With that said, there's a lot to love about VS2. For one, the new planetary technology is extraordinary. Verdure might be one of the most beautiful planets I've ever seen in a video game. The variety of landscapes and sense of scale when climbing a mountainside or speeding through dry ocean beds, we'll get to that in a moment, is unmatched in anything I've played before. There were genuine moments in my exploration where I stopped at a ledge and felt disoriented at the scale of the jagged rocks leading to the canyon below. Verdure itself is covered in obvious regions designed to be filled with water at a later time. For now, the entire planet surface is unrestricted for exploration and discovery, but eventually we'll be building underwater domes, submarines, warships, and maybe even hydroelectric dams across the surface of this celestial jewel. As I explored, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of excitement at walking on the world that would soon be filled with countless engineers and their creations. This, my friends, is the world of the future, and it's every bit as beautiful as we were promised. Chemic is a world with a beauty all its own. It has some interesting canyons to explore, but I found it to be much less interesting than its counterpart. After exploring the planet for a while, it will make for great Mad Max-style gameplay, but many of the canyons seem to run together for me. Verdure will most likely appeal to a wider range of engineering playstyles, while Chemic will find its own unique player base who prefer the sepia skies of a dead world. For those engineers that are fans of building on Mars in SE1, they will most likely be the people who fall in love with Chemic. Let's talk about the gameplay and the update itself. There are some surprising decisions made by Keen for this update, and instead of doing a list of good and bad, I'm just going to talk about the gameplay experience and give you my perspective as those elements come up. First, the survival experience in VS2 is completely separate from creative mode. That means that planets do not spawn in the game's creative mode at Concordia Station, and separately, there are no creative mode options in survival. You won't be freely building a massive, sprawling station complex on Verdure or building immense starships without mining for the resources and managing your build in the survival loop. The survival mode also lacks any functional spectator camera or reliable player-based GPS coordinate system as well. So, getting around will rely largely on pre-programmed markers and your own personal sense of direction. Personally, the lack of having a planetary option in creative mode was disappointing, along with the spectator camera option, especially considering that it is already enabled in the game's original creative mode. At this point, I would be fine just having Verdure spawn into creative mode, even without the larger parts of the Almagest system, just so I could start building freely on the planet's surface. Keen assures us that a full sandbox experience will come in time, but for now, any building on the surface will require us to follow the rules of the survival loop until that sandbox option arrives. VS2 includes the first part of the new SE2 campaign storyline. You begin on the surface of Verdure in a crashed pod and are tasked with repairing a small ship. During the repairs, there is a brief conversation between the player's character Miro and his brother communicating through the radio. Following a brief conversation, players are thrust into a series of contracts designed to introduce them to some of the game's basic mechanics. Many of these contracts involve some form of ship, station, or other facility repair, while some require you to build unique vehicles to accomplish tasks like rearranging or hauling cargo. None of the contract tasks are particularly difficult, and there is a wide enough variety of them to keep players engaged as they explore the first two sectors of the Almagest system. As players progress in the colonization loop, they visit several space stations and ground installations that slowly advance the Almagest storyline. Even from the beginning, the starter ship and Velation station add an extra level of support and freedom to the survival experience that was not present in Space Engineers. With a few minor repairs, the starter ship can easily hop between Velation Station and contract locations across Verdure. Of course, all of this gameplay is optional. You don't have to begin the colonization loop or participate in the contract missions. However, at the moment, there is no way to disable the missions or hide the contract waypoints from the HUD. Instead, you can simply walk away from the starter ship and begin building your own designs on the Verdurian surface. But before you do that, I urge you to continue listening to this review for advice on why that might be a bad idea. Before we get into the survival gameplay, let's talk about the user interface. I'm a fan of the new UI style introduced in SE2, but the implementation in VS2 is one of my biggest complaints about the release. The interface itself during regular gameplay is cluttered and inconsistent. Merrick has mentioned in his dev blogs that he wants the game to effectively communicate with the player as they work, but the constant barrage of pop-ups in various places on the screen is more distracting than helpful. Some pop-ups appear below the reticle, while others appear in the bottom right corner, and others appear in both of the top corners. Add the fact that you currently cannot hide signal indicators, including contracts or missions, and this leads to a painfully cluttered visual experience. Keen is well aware of the feedback on the UI, and I hope they take it into account in a future update. Survival in Space Engineers 2 is much different from its predecessor, both in function and difficulty. Overall, it's not that hard to survive in the Almagest system in this early Foundations update because the system is littered with abandoned stations and settlements, as well as a hydrogen ship that provides the engineer with almost everything they need to live a somewhat carefree life. Of course, you're free to simply walk away from the abandoned structures and free ships to try to survive in the Verdurian wilderness if you want. However, that currently comes with some significant drawbacks. Keen has promised that the colonization loop in SE2 will be entirely optional. However, that is not the case in the VS2 update because Keen not only wants us to experience the first elements of Almagest, they also want us to test out and evaluate the first parts of the colonization loop. The only way for the player to unlock blocks and progress in survival is to complete the colonization contracts on Verdure and eventually on Kemek. There are approximately 10 of these missions that can be started from each planet's respective orbital station. I'm sure that there are other ways of unlocking the progression blocks that will come soon, but for now, colonization is the only way to get access to some of the more technical blocks on the game. On top of this, you can only do one contract at a time. So if a contract takes you 200 kilometers away from Velation Station, you must accept that contract at the station, fly to and complete the contract, and then return 200 kilometers to the station to turn in the contract before accepting another one. In my opinion, it adds artificial length to the mission progress system. I'd like to see the ability to carry at least 2 or 3 of these missions at a time to avoid having to return to the main planetary port each time. Perhaps one of Survival's best new features is projection building. Given that there's currently no creative mode on the new planets, projection building is the next best thing. With projection building, you have access to unlimited resources and mirror building, known as symmetry mode in SE1, which allows you to fully construct your build as a holographic projection before spending a single raw resource to construct it. So you can simply worry about your energy and fuel while designing the base or ship of your dreams, perfect it, and then go out to locate the resources to construct it. And speaking of resources, there are significant changes to the way that resources are mined and refined. Your backpack is now capable of refining materials and constructing some basic components. This allows you to gather resources and begin construction on simple blocks without having to process the raw ore in a refinery. However, you'll still need to forge items in an assembler or smelter for more complicated equipment. And as I mentioned in my video on changes to mining in SE2, drilling blindly into the ground no longer yields crafting materials. You must use the drill or an ore detector to find mineral hotspots for all raw ores in Almagest, which is just one of the reasons that projection building is such a lifesaver. Getting hyped for the release of a video game these days can be risky, especially for a content creator. It's a gamble to listen to a PR team expound on the intricacies of an update and shower us with fancy buzzwords that are designed to instill a sense of anticipation and excitement. In a sea of mediocrity, Keen Software House has been quite the enigma with SE2. From day one, Merrick has emphasized the alpha state of SE2 and reminded people that the game has a long way to go. It's not going to be for everyone, including fans of SE1. In time, the features that people want will most likely come to the game. VS 2.2 already promises us more advanced survival options, rotors, and pistons. But for now, it's still a game in very early alpha access, but one that is moving along much faster in development than its predecessor. With that said, I believe that Keen has absolutely delivered on its promises with VS2, and they've proven that Space Engineers 2 is on its way to being a viable successor to the original Space Engineers. Verdure and Chemic are every bit as majestic as we were told, and the very basic foundations of survival are there as promised. As mentioned previously, I am disappointed there was no creative mode options for the planets in VS2, so I'll have to wait a bit longer for that. My concerns with the UI clutter remain, as well as my issues with the contract system being the only option for block progressions. However, none of these concerns are necessarily game-breaking. They're manageable items that slightly detract from the game, but they aren't deal breakers for me. The unified grid system shines in VS2 with projection building and the return of symmetry mode, and backpack crafting makes basic block construction so much easier and effective than in SE1. Overall, I think VS2 is a worthy step forward for forging the next generation of space engineers. Personally, I consider myself honored to be among the first engineers in history to walk on the surface of these new worlds. The first moment I took steps in the forest of Verdure made it all worth it. I hope that you enjoyed this review of Vertical Slice 2 in Space Engineers 2. Make sure to like the video if you did and subscribe to the channel, as I will continue to cover the ongoing development of both SE1 and SE2 going forward. Until next time, I'm Commander Ashes. Take care, fly safe, and I'll see you out there.